Hello, I'm Carrie Wrigley. This is my final exam video for Education and History 3521, Spring 2018. Today is Saturday, April 14th, 2018. In the documentary, Through These Eyes, Dr. Bruner asks these questions. What is distinctly human about human beings compared to others? I'm a little confused about this question because I don't know if he's asking about other societies and other cultures, or if he's asking what makes us distinct in the animal kingdom. In the animal kingdom, what makes us distinct is our ability to write our thoughts down and our ability to think about time in the past, present, and future. His second question was, how did they get that way? And his third and last question was, how do humans become more human? The following is how I would rephrase these questions to apply them to our education system. What is distinctive about our country's public education system compared to other countries' schools? The one that stands out is that there is school reform constantly going on in our country. In the book, Death and Life in the American School System, the author Diana Ravitch wrote, constant reform is not the approach of other countries with successful schools. She also noted that as a graduate student during research, she noticed that there was a crisis in every decade of the 20th century in our education system. How did our public education system get this way? It would appear that the federal government, having funding, contributed to the perceived crisis that our schools were and still are failing our children. Both Ravitch, whose book I've already mentioned, and John Rury, whose book is titled Education and Social Change, Contours in the History of American Schooling, both wrote about how the federal money changed the priorities of our schools. They both also believe that the federal government's involvement caused the system to become test-driven. In the book Huck's Raft, A History of American Childhood, Stephen Mintz wrote, the trumpeting of a dire crisis among our young proves to be a highly effective way to get the public's attention. In 1983, the federal government released a report called Our Nation at Risk. This report began the current climate, claiming that our schools are failing. Ravitch wrote, it was this report that planted the seeds of crisis, and this report, business groups and politicians saw that they could blame the schools for our economic and social problems. Rury stated that schooling had become too important for the federal government not to want to have a role in the policy making and funding. In 2002, the No Child Left Behind Act was signed. Rury said this act changed our schools across the country by making standardized tests the primary measure of school quality. Ravitch wrote that the No Child Left Behind Act mandated the impossible 100% proficiency, something that has never been done and attained by any nation. Test scores also determined which schools would remain open and which were closed. Neither the A Nation at Risk report or the No Child Left Behind report recognized that our schools were and still are dealing with a growing number of students who do not read, write, or speak English, and also the fact that children with disabilities were now a factor in the school system. Another question, my third question is, how does public education in America become more about education and less about politics? First, we must address the issues. The real issues are poverty, segregation, racism, and inequality. All of these issues are not new to our country or our society in education. They have been around since we founded our country. since our country was founded. We also need to come to an agreement about what a good education is and what the goals are. The information I've gained during this course is thought-provoking. I always thought the government had ultimate control over the education system. I learned it was originally the individual states who decided the curriculum and how the money was spent. I can tell you that I am not at all surprised that the media drove this crisis in education perspective. Education in our country has schools and society have affected one another. How has education been affected? Educational opportunities for women increased in the 19th century, which contributed substantially to social change. Schooling provided women with skills to become activists for themselves as well as others. The Industrial Revolution also caused a great deal of social change. This change happened because of the enormous economic growth and the migration of people from the country to the cities where the jobs were. With the growth of industry, support for public education grew, and also education became available to the poor masses. Ruby wrote, "The connections between education and society is subject to many conditions, raising literary rates, attributed partly to formal education. This human capital, this leads to economic growth. Schooling contributes to human capital via reading and writing skills, thus social development." He also wrote, "Schools have transformed over the centuries based on the need of society for each generation. Each generation has received the education they needed to succeed in their respective society. So in turn, our schools are really a reflection of our society, or perhaps our society is really a reflection of our schools." Changes in the economy and society drive the process of change in our public education system. Examining education from a historical perspective requires us to try to understand what happens, the context in which it happened, and what assumptions led to people to act like they did. We need to have restraint in affecting events, realizing that unforeseen developments can lead to unplanned results. Looking forward, we need to realize the issues of poverty, inequality, racism, and segregation are still alive and well in our society and in our schools. We need to deal with them head on. Bruner later in his career turned to this question of culture, society, and education. Culture, society, and education influence human growth and development. The influence that they have, education and society and education have on so how do you get it to play? How do you